You ever wonder how folks used to keep food fresh before refrigerators? I mean, we're talking way back, long before electricity was lighting up kitchens and running those humming ice boxes. Turns out some folks still live that way, relying on old-school know-how to keep their pantries stocked year-round. We're headed to Amish country to meet some folks who've kept these time-tested traditions alive. They're gonna show us how they preserve meat without relying on modern conveniences. No freezers, no fancy gadgets, just good old-fashioned ingenuity and a whole lot of hard work. We're talking salt curing, smoking, drying, pickling, and even burying meat underground. These folks have figured out how to make nature work for them, and trust me, it's a sight to behold. So, get ready to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty as we dive into the fascinating world of Amish meat preservation. Salt. It's more than just a seasoning, it's a natural preservative that's been used for centuries to keep food safe to eat. See, salt draws out moisture from meat through a process called osmosis. Basically, it sucks the water right out of those bacterial cells, making it impossible for them to survive. Think of it like this. You ever swim in the ocean and come out feeling all dried out? That's salt at work. Now this salt cure ain't a quick fix. It takes time, patience, and the right touch. But done right, it transforms tough cuts of meat into flavorful, shelf-stable delicacies. First, you gotta give that meat a good rub down with salt, making sure every nook and cranny is covered. Then, it's off to a cool, dry place where it can hang out and do its thing. Now, I'm talking weeks, sometimes even months of hanging. Temperature and humidity play a big role in this process. Too warm, and you risk spoilage. Too humid, and you'll end up with a moldy mess. The Amish have a knack for finding that sweet spot, relying on their senses and years of experience. They know when the meat's ready just by looking at it, feeling it, even smelling it. Now if you thought salt curing was fascinating, wait till you see how these folks use smoke to preserve their meat. We're not talking about your backyard barbecue here. This is a slow and steady process that imparts incredible flavor and longevity. The smoke does more than just add flavor, it's a natural preservative. The heat from the smoldering wood dries out the meat, while the smoke itself contains compounds that inhibit bacterial growth. It's like giving the meat a suit of armor, protecting it from the elements and those pesky microbes. Amish smokehouses are like something out of a history book. They're often small, wooden structures built with a keen understanding of airflow and temperature control. The type of wood used for smoking is crucial. Hardwoods like hickory, maple, and oak are popular choices, each imparting its unique flavor profile. Temperature control is key to successful smoking. Too hot and you'll end up with jerky. Too cool, and the meat might not cure properly. It's a delicate dance, and the Amish have perfected it over generations. They know how to read the smoke, adjust the vents, and ensure the meat gets the perfect amount of smoky goodness. Alright folks, we're moving on to method number 3, drying. Now, you might know this one better as making jerky, and let me tell you, it's about as old school as it gets. The Amish, they've been drying meat for centuries, long before beef jerky became a gas station staple. The key here is to remove moisture, because bacteria, those little troublemakers, they love a good damp environment. By taking away their water source, you're essentially putting them out of business. First things first, you gotta slice that meat thin, like about a 1/4 inch or so. Think paper-thin potato chips, but with a lot more protein. The thinner the slices, the faster they dry, and the less chance those pesky bacteria have to set up shop. Now you can dry meat in a bunch of ways. In the sun, over a fire, even in a dehydrator if you're feeling fancy. But no matter the method, the goal is the same. Low and slow heat to draw out that moisture without cooking the meat. Speaking of not cooking, how do you know when your jerky's done? Well, you can't exactly stick a thermometer in it and check for an internal temperature like you would with a steak. No sir, for jerky, we gotta go old school. We're talking about the bend test. That's right, you heard me correctly. Take a piece of your dried meat and gently bend it in half. If it cracks but doesn't break, kinda like a green twig, you're good to go. But if it snaps like a dry twig, well, you've gone too far and your jerky's gonna be tougher than a $2 steak. And if it bends like a wet noodle, you guessed it, it needs more time to dry. It's a delicate dance, folks, but with a little practice and a good dose of patience, you'll be cranking out delicious, shelf-stable jerky that'd make any Amish grandma proud. let's move on to a method that's near and dear to my heart and my stomach: pickling. Now when I say pickling, I ain't just talking about cucumbers. The Amish, they pickle everything from eggs to beets to, you guessed it, meat. See, pickling is all about creating an environment so inhospitable that bacteria just can't survive. It's like trying to grow tomatoes in a salt flat, ain't gonna happen. The key ingredient here is, you guessed it, vinegar. That tangy, acidic goodness lowers the pH level, which is like kryptonite to those microscopic critters trying to spoil your food. But vinegar ain't working alone. We're also talking salt, which draws out moisture and inhibits bacterial growth, and spices, which not only add flavor but often have antimicrobial properties themselves. It's a triple threat of deliciousness and preservation. Now the pickling process itself is pretty straightforward. You start by making a brine, which is just a fancy word for a salty, vinegary solution. You can customize your brine with different spices depending on what you're pickling and your own personal taste. Once your brine is ready, you pack your meat into clean jars, leaving a little space at the top. Then, you pour that brine over the meat, making sure it's completely submerged. Think of it like giving your meat a nice, relaxing bath in a jacuzzi of preservation. Now, it's important to use non-reactive containers for pickling, like glass jars or ceramic crocks. Avoid metal as it can react with the brine and give your pickles a metallic taste, and nobody wants that. Finally, you seal those jars up tight and store them in a cool, dark place. The pickling process takes time, so be patient, folks. Good things come to those who wait, especially when it comes to tangy, flavorful pickled meat. Let's move on to a method that's as old as the hills and just as reliable: lard sealing. Now I know what you're thinking, lard. Isn't that, well, kinda old-fashioned? And you know what? You're right. But sometimes, the old ways are the best ways. And this, my friends, is a prime example. See, lard, for all its simplicity, is a preservation powerhouse. It's pure animal fat, rendered down, and it creates an airtight seal around your food that would make a Tupperware container jealous. Now back in the day, before refrigerators were a twinkle in some inventor's eye, folks relied on lard to keep their meat from spoiling. They'd render down lard from pigs they'd butchered, then pack cooked meat into crocks or jars, and pour that liquid gold over the top. As the lard cooled, it solidified, creating an impenetrable barrier against oxygen, bacteria, and anything else that might try to mess with their precious food supply. The process of lard sealing is pretty darn simple. First, you gotta render your lard. This involves slowly cooking down pork fat over low heat until all the liquid fat melts away, leaving behind crispy little cracklings. Once you've got your liquid gold, you're ready to start sealing. Pack your cooked meat into clean, dry jars or crocks, leaving about an inch of space at the top. Then, carefully pour that melted lard over the meat, making sure it completely covers everything and reaches the top of the jar. As the lard cools and solidifies, it'll create that airtight seal we talked about, locking in flavor and freshness. Now it's important to store your lard-sealed jars in a cool, dark place. And when I say cool, I mean really cool. A root cellar, a spring house, or even the back of your fridge if you're short on space. Trust me folks, this method is like hitting the pause button on spoilage. It's like time travel for your taste buds. You ever spend time in a root cellar? It's like stepping back in time. These dugouts, often tucked beneath a barn or house, are basically nature's refrigerator. Cool, dark, and humid, perfect for keeping all sorts of food fresh for the long haul. We're talking root vegetables, fruits, preserves, and you guessed it, meat. The Amish, they understand the value of a good root cellar. They've been building them for generations, using simple materials like stone, brick, and good old-fashioned dirt. The key is insulation. Gotta keep that outside heat from messing with the natural coolness of the earth. Now, the temperature and humidity in a root cellar, it ain't gonna be exact like your fancy refrigerator with all the bells and whistles. It fluctuates a bit with the seasons, but that's part of the beauty. See, that slow, gradual change, it actually helps age and tenderize the meat. Think of it like a slow dance between nature and your food. No harsh temperatures, no freezer burn, just good old-fashioned aging that would make a steakhouse chef jealous. Alright, so you got yourself a root cellar, or maybe you're thinking about building one. Either way, you gotta know how to prep your meat for the big sleep downstairs. First off, cleanliness is next to godliness, as they say. Make sure that meat is clean and dry. No extra moisture hanging around to invite unwanted bacteria to the party. Next up, you gotta wrap it right. Cheesecloth, muslin, or even plain brown butcher paper. Something breathable that'll let the meat do its thing. Avoid plastic wrap down here. We're going for natural preservation, remember? Now here's a little trick of the trade. Before you wrap that meat up tight, give it a good rub with salt and pepper. Not only does it add flavor, but it also acts as an extra layer of protection against spoilage. Once your meat is all prepped and ready to go, find a good spot in the cellar. Hang it from hooks, or store it in baskets. Just make sure it's got some breathing room and isn't sitting directly on the floor. Before refrigerators and deep freezers, folks had to get creative to keep their food from spoiling. And when it came to preserving meat, nothing beat the natural refrigeration of snow and ice. Now, this wasn't just burying a side of beef in a snowdrift and hoping for the best. No sir, these folks built themselves ice houses. Imagine a giant, well-insulated shed, sometimes built partially underground. Come winter, they'd fill it to the brim with ice harvested from frozen lakes and ponds. They'd pack that ice tight, layer it with sawdust for insulation, and bam, you've got yourself a natural freezer that could keep food cold for months. This wasn't just some quaint practice either. Ice houses were essential for communities, allowing them to store meat, dairy, and other perishables throughout the year. It's a testament to human ingenuity, figuring out how to harness the power of nature to preserve their food. And let me tell you, meat stored in an ice house, it's got a different kind of quality to it. That slow, natural freezing process, it creates a finer texture, almost like aging a good steak. It's a taste of the past that's hard to beat. Storing meat in an ice house is all about keeping things cold and consistent. Once that ice house is packed tight, it's time to start thinking about how you're going to store your meat. Now you can't just toss a whole hog in there and call it a day. No sir, you gotta pack it right. First things first, wrap that meat up tight. Cheesecloth, muslin, or even plain brown butcher paper will do the trick. Keep that air out and the cold in. Once it's wrapped up snug, you gotta layer it with, you guessed it, more ice. This is where that sawdust comes in handy again. Sprinkle it between those layers of meat and ice to keep things insulated and prevent any nasty air pockets from forming. Think of it like tucking your food in for a long winter's nap. Now the beauty of an ice house is that it maintains a consistently cool temperature, much colder than your average root cellar. This allows for longer-term storage and a slower, more even freeze, which helps to preserve the texture and flavor of the meat. It's like hitting the pause button on spoilage. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From salt curing and smoking to burying meat in the cool embrace of the earth, we've explored the time-tested techniques the Amish use to keep their food safe and delicious. These methods, they might seem old-fashioned, maybe even a little bit dirty, but there's a wisdom there that we've lost touch with. These techniques are about more than just preserving food. They're about preserving a way of life, a connection to the land, and the rhythms of the natural world. So next time you open your refrigerator, take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity and hard work that went into putting food on our tables for centuries. And hey, maybe you'll even be inspired to try some of these methods yourself. Remember folks, preserving these skills isn't just about holding on to the past. It's about shaping a future where we're more connected to our food and the resources we have. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go see if I can find a good recipe for salt-cured ham. Until next time, get out there and get your hands dirty. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Let's keep these traditions alive.